Okay, I'm going to try something slightly different this week just to change the pace up, but also to keep everybody involved and to make it a little bit more interesting for me as well. Is I'm going to use this stylus and this little pad to draw some figures. So this week, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an overview, and what we're going to talk about is mediation. Now you'll see exactly why I do not write more for you. Because my handwriting, I obviously failed penmanship when I was a kid, and it's never improved. In fact, it's gotten steadily worse. But this week, this is week 6, and week 6 is on mediation. And what I'm going to talk about this week is, as you can see from the website, there's no specific readings. A lot of what I've talked about in the past, I have some links that I will post on the course website. But what we're going to discuss this week is this whole process of assessing. We have an antecedent and a mediator and a consequence. And normally what we do is we assess the antecedent predicting the consequence. That's just ordinary regression that we've covered already, and this is a bivariate model. But what happens if we have a causal pathway that goes between our antecedent and some other variable, in this case what we're calling a mediator, and the consequence? Well, what happens is testing it isn't as straightforward as we would think, because remember, what we have in regression is we typically have something along the lines of this, where we have one variable and we have a variable, we have one variable, and this is our typical dv, our y, and then we have a variable, say x1, that's a here, and x2 is m, and we would have two predictors. But what happens if there's a relationship, and I'm not talking about a relationship where these are both correlated, that's multiclinearity, but instead where there is a causal linkage between a and this other variable. And let me see if I can draw that a little bit better. There we go. So there's a relationship so that the effect of a on c goes through m. Now that's slightly different than our moderated effect. And our moderated effect, I'm going to change colors here, see how well I do. Our moderated effect was that. So that the relationship between A and C is contingent or influenced by this variable, which was our moderator. But now for our model for mediation, what we're doing is we are testing this. And because, whoa, I really lost the handle on that, so you're going to have to bear with me as I learn how to use this thing. What you're going to see is we have now two dependent variables. We have a c and an m, because anything that the arrows point to is a dependent variable. So we have c and m as two dependent variables, and one thing we've learned in regression is right now we're only focused on one dependent variable, but now we've got two, so we have to break this model apart if we're going to use ordinary least squares regression like what we've been learning and going over. So mediation is a different causal pathway, and instead of a moderated effect, now I'm going to put this back into this other color, and that's a moderated effect. So that's an arrow, and that arrow is the one that influences, so the arrow is a causal pathway, and m as a moderator causes or influences the effect between A and C, our antecedent and our consequence. Whereas in mediation, our mediator sits between, think of it as a median in a highway. It sits between two lines of traffic, but in this case it sits between a causal agent, antecedent, and the consequence, our outcome. So that's what we're going to be covering this week. We're going to talk about what this model is, what a mediator is, how a mediator comes about, some of the characteristics of mediators versus moderators, how to test them, There are lots of specific tools originally developed in the mid to late 80s, and then since that time there are tools that have been refined over the years. So we're going to talk about both classical testing of mediation as well as contemporary testing of mediation. And then I'm going to wrap it up with more complex models where we don't just have a mediator, but in this case, just like I have it modeled here, we have a mediator and a moderator. So stay tuned for more of those videos, and it should be pretty interesting watching me write. Stay tuned.